All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you all so much for joining us today. We are the Triad Cyber Roundtable. We're a group of cybersecurity experts here in the Triad, North Carolina, and we are comprised of threat management, law, IT, and insurance. And what we do is basically host different events and speak about the importance of cybersecurity. We came together in 2018 and decided there was such a growing need for cybersecurity education from all different fields, including that from law and insurance and IT and how management of different threats and cybersecurity happens in your business, that we really decided to come together and share our knowledge and share our experience and help make the Triad kind of a safer place. So first, I want to hand it over to Dan, who's going to do a little bit of a legal intro for us. Dan?
My name is Dan Lowell. I'm a licensed attorney in North Carolina, but I am not your attorney. The information that you'll receive in this webcast is our personal and professional opinions, but none of this is to be construed as legal advice.
All right, and with that, I'll hand it over to Rob.
Hello, this is Rob Arnold. I am going to talk to you a little bit about cyber risk management. Specifically, what the group is trying to do today is position cybersecurity as what it really is, which is a business problem rather than just a technology problem. That's not to say that technology is not an important part of cybersecurity. It most certainly is, but it has grown well beyond just being something that you can hand off to your IT folks to solve for you. We're going to hear from other experts today talking about the areas of insurance and law, and even those are not the full picture. But without further ado, a little bit about myself. I work up in D.C. Doing a lot of work with Homeland Security. I've represented the small business population and nonprofits at a key roundtable event. I sit on Homeland Security's ICT Supply Chain Task Force. I've testified before Congress. I sit on a number of advisory boards and belong to a number of other organizations involved in helping fight cybersecurity issues around the country. I wrote the book on cyber risk management from the perspective of the executive, and I've spoken for the Wall Street Journal, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and a number of other groups that have requested me to help educate their audiences. And of course, lastly, I am the founder and CEO of ThreatSketch, where our goal is to help executives manage cyber risk, again, as a business problem rather than as strictly an IT problem. So it's important to remember that often it's your competitors or your peers that are the deepest concerned, not necessarily the hackers. And what exactly do I mean by that? I mean that we are all sitting on the starting line, getting ready to take off on our race. And one or two of us are going to fall or falter and fall behind. You don't want to be the one that ends up at the end because you will be the loser. You want to make sure that you're at least outpacing your competitors with your cybersecurity spending and with your cybersecurity approach. So if you're going to take the chance, the tactic of, well, I'll just wait and see what happens and then we'll deal with the aftermath, you're pretty much guaranteed to be bitten by the bear. So what's an executive supposed to be doing within an organization when we're talking about cybersecurity? Most importantly, we're supposed to be building a better team, just like we would build a sports team. We want the players to be more physically fit, and we want a diverse set of skills so that we can win on the court. The court, of course, being a metaphor for our businesses. And the ultimate goal, of course, is to win more contracts, more clients, and more opportunities. So when you're looking at the cyber risk management problem, it's not just about how do I stop the hackers. It's also about how do I position my organization so that my clients see me as the more secure option than my competitors, because cybersecurity is starting to matter a great deal around the country with consumers and with your client organizations as well. So again, we've talked about this being a survival of the fittest. Cyber attacks are actually a cash flow storm for a small business. You have expenses that are going up as you're trying to clean up the mess and deal with data breach notifications and so forth. And you also have revenues going down because clients are defecting and going off to other places where they feel more secure. And so it's important from the executive seat to be managing that cash flow problem. Fletcher will talk a little bit about cyber insurance, and that's one of those great tools that you can have to help offset some of those expenses. But the point is, we want to make a more fiscally fit company that will be able to run faster and outlast their peers. And of course, we want to differentiate ourselves. Again, falling back to the sports metaphor, we want to have a diverse bench. We don't want to have just one set of skills going at this. Typically, that's just the IT folks. Again, very important, but not the only player that's out there. There again, we underscore the objective here is to win more contracts, more clients, and more opportunities through what you do to armor yourself up. So the first thing to do is to assemble a starting team. So your starting team is, first of all, you, the executive sponsor. If you're not going to get behind and lead the cybersecurity initiative, nobody else is going to do a good job for it. That's really your primary role. Again, I've written a whole book about that, and I won't go into all the details, but the important thing is that you get yourself on board first. Next, you're going to need legal, insurance, cybersecurity specialists, and IT staff and vendors who are operating on the front line, all on your starting bench. So to take it a little bit further, we're going to deepen the bench with banking and financial advisors, public relations, maybe even building relationships with law enforcement right up front, and sales and marketing. Now, that sales and marketing one, obviously we've been talking about how do you win more clients, more opportunities. It's through sales and marketing who help you figure out how to present what you're doing for cybersecurity as a win for your clients, whether they're consumers or other businesses. They want to know that your business is more safe and secure. And if you can do that, you will end up winning more business. And that's why sales and marketing is part of this team. They may not bring a whole lot of technical savvy to this table, although maybe some of them have that. But the important thing is they know how to position these things for your client. So with that in mind, it's important that you build your starting point, deepen your bench with specialized skills, make sure that you as the business owner stay fully in control of the situation and guide the organization toward a better cybersecurity posture, one that not only protects the organization, but helps propel it forward in the marketplace. And I'll tell you this for sure, if you don't step up and make your organization more attractive to your clients, when there is a data breach within your industry, you're going to be in a position to miss the opportunity to snap up all of those clients that are going to be looking somewhere else to take their business. So make sure that cybersecurity is not just part of your IT strategy, but also part of your business strategy. And with that, I'll turn it over to Robert, and he can tell you about the cybersecurity specifics that you need to be concerned about with your organization.
Hi, everybody. My name is Robert Phelps. I'm the president of Creative IT, and I'm here to talk to you about the IT perspective to cybercrime and cybersecurity and why it's a serious and growing threat that should not be ignored by your organization. So first, a little bit about me and my company. Like I said, my name is Robert Phelps. I'm the president of Creative IT. And Creative IT is a local IT provider. We provide fully managed IT services to our customers around the clock. We have support 24/7, 365. We also provide full cybersecurity solutions, fully managed with our security operations center and all of our security tools. We provide those just as simple as someone who just wants secure antivirus, all the way up to fully managed security services to customers both here in North Carolina and around the country. We also are a full compliance group. We deal with customers who need to be HIPAA compliant, PCI compliant, and we handle their auditing as well as their compliance needs to make sure that if they were to get audited on behalf of HIPAA, that they would pass and not have to worry about the issues surrounding those compliances. So the first thing I want to talk about is, what is cybercrime, right? Well, take the word cyber out of it and just think of it as crime. Most people would think of crime as someone robbing a bank or pulling a gun on you and taking your personal items, breaking into your house. Well, the fact is, nowadays, more crime happens through the airwaves, through our computers, than it does in any other state. So as you can see in this image here, the biggest data breaches, the biggest crimes here are happening with companies like eBay and Adobe and business bank account hacks and things of that nature. So crime in its form nowadays, it is so much easier for someone to be sitting halfway around the world and breaking into your computer and stealing your accounts, getting into your bank and emptying your accounts and draining your credit cards and things of that nature. So that's what's happening. This is what it's becoming as far as how criminals are working nowadays. Now, what a lot of people think of when they think of a hacker, right? We're going to call them hackers to make it easy and talk about these criminals, is a guy like this. Someone sitting in his basement, hacking away, targeting a company like Equifax and Target, and just trying to get into those organizations and attack them and get as much money, resources, whatever it is that they're after that they can. But the fact is, it's actually people like this. This is a company outing from a company called Innovative Marketing. This is their building. This is their receptionist desk. This is a job opening for a position that they have. And this is their average income. $113,000 is the average salary of an employee. And this is their product. What they made were these fake pop-ups that would make you think you had a virus. You would call them. They would remote into your computer to fix that virus as tech support. And they would do a couple things. They would get you to pay them to fix this non-issue. They would steal money out of your bank accounts. They would steal passwords off your computer. They would get credit card numbers, whatever they could do to make money. And the fact is, these are enterprises. These are organizations. They are well-run, well-funded businesses. Don't get that wrong. They are businesses that are using the new age of cybercrime as an attack vector, as a way to make money. These are large businesses with lots of employees. These are not just a guy sitting in his basement. I don't know how many of you know this gentleman. His name's Robert Herjavec. Many of you will know him from the Shark Tank, but he actually runs a large cybersecurity firm out of Canada. And I've seen him speak on a couple occasions. And one of the things that he said that really resonated with me is this quote here. There are two types of companies that exist: those that are being hacked and those that don't know they're being hacked. And in fact, I'm going to talk about some of the misconceptions surrounding cybercrime, cybersecurity for small businesses, some of the things that I hear on a daily basis from a lot of the people that I talk to. And I think by the end of it, you'll agree with Robert here that that is exactly what is happening. So the first thing I hear, the most common thing I hear is, I am too small. I am too small for anyone to want to attack me. No one is going to come after business XYZ. I've got 20 employees and no one's going to ever attack me. Well, the fact is, Verizon did a study and it shows the opposite. 58% of businesses that were breached were small businesses. And this isn't because someone sitting behind a computer halfway across the world is targeting your business. No, what they do is they actually put out a net. They're like phishing. They are putting out a net. They are putting their malware online through emails, through phishing campaigns, and they're sending it to as many people as they can, because with today's technology, it's so much easier to do that. And all it takes is someone clicking on a link, downloading something, getting to something to get compromised, to get your data compromised, to end up with your account hacked or breached or money missing out of your bank because someone clicked on something dumb. And the fact is, small businesses end up making up a huge chunk of that pie because they don't have the resources that the large companies do. They don't have the cybersecurity tools. They don't have the investment in the infrastructure like the larger companies that are around us. So, when a cyber attacker or hacker puts these things out there, a lot of small businesses end up getting cast in that net. The next thing I hear is, it doesn't happen that often. And in fact, a University of Maryland study showed that a cyber attack happens every 39 seconds. In the time that I've been talking, 11 attacks have happened. So this is something that's happening every day to dozens of other small business owners. This is happening day in, day out. And I can tell you, I can attest to that from a lot of the companies that we help, that these attacks are real and they're happening in our backyard. Next thing, and Fletcher will talk a lot about this, is it won't cost that much to recover. Well, IBM did a study and found the average data breach actually cost $3.86 million. And Fletcher will talk about how a lot of companies think they can self-insure, they can save up some money or just take it out of the rainy day fund to pay for these cyber attacks, when the fact is that the cost is astronomical a lot of times to fix what these hackers can do. The biggest one I hear, right, that goes along with all of the others is this won't happen to me, right? It's like, well, I've never been in a car accident. I've never broken my leg, so it won't happen to me. We've been safe for 20 years. We're good. This will not happen to me. The fact is, it is alarming how often this happens. We talked about that it happens every 39 seconds, but I want to talk about the percentage of businesses that are breached. In 2016, it was 29% of all small businesses that had a breach. It's kind of crazy that 29%, over a quarter of the companies, were breached. But here's even more the staggering number. In 2019, that same study was done, and it's over 80% of businesses now that have been breached. And mind you, like Robert Herjavec said, those are the ones that know they've been breached, right? It's some of the ones that don't know, maybe in that 20%, so the number may be higher than we actually know. So taking that into account, right? It's never happened to me, so it won't ever happen. That's another conversation I hear. A lot of things that I have, conversations that I have, and it kind of goes back to the car accident, the broken leg. Well, exactly what Robert Herjavec said. Out of all the breaches that have happened, 74% of companies knew and were the ones who were aware that the breach had happened. The other 26%, it was brought to their attention by an outside source. They had zero clue that that breach had happened. And what this means is that there may be breaches going on all the time that you don't find out about until the money's out of your account, or a customer comes up and you says, hey, this data was out there, or an attorney or FBI agent shows up at your door wanting to request some information. And that's the last thing that you want. So when talking about how often this happens, when talking about this doesn't happen to me, right? Let's talk about the headlines. These are things that have happened right in our backyard. You remember the Rockingham County Schools, Mecklenburg County. This is happening all over. And you hear about it from these larger companies, and you hear about it from these government agencies. And that's what gets people in the mindset of, oh, well, it won't happen to me. I'm too small, because you only hear about it from the larger companies. Well, the reason that is because the larger companies, especially government agencies, have to disclose, right? A small business who gets breached, who loses all their customer data, they're probably not going to want anybody to know. They're not going to go run into the press saying, oh, look what happened to me. They're going to hide it. They're going to cover it as best as they can. And I can speak firsthand about this because we help customers who obviously go through this, and they're not running to the press and telling people about these data breaches. So that's one of the things to always remember, is that this happens, but obviously it's not something that most people are going to go publicize. So how does this impact me? Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about it from a financial risk analysis and a loss prevention. If you were to suffer a data breach and not be able to service your customers and your clients like you are today, whether that's you have a server with all your data that goes down and you can't run your business the way you could because you've lost that data, or you just can't turn around that data as fast enough. If that happens, the average shows that 60% of your clients will consider leaving. They will just overnight say, I'm done with you. I'm going to go elsewhere. And 30% of that will. So if you said you had a gross profit last year of $100 million, right? That'd be $30 million leaving your bank account. You did $1 million. It's $300,000 leaving your bank account overnight due to the everlasting effects of a data breach or a ransomware attack or any of these attacks going on. So how often does this happen? Well, the fact is that 56% of attacks are caused by insiders and employees. So how this happens is actually more often than not, your employees clicking on something dumb, doing something stupid, or nefariously or on purpose, letting someone into your company. And the crazy thing about this is that with these employees, if you think about it, you're giving them backdoor access into your company. You are giving them the tools and everything that they need to be able to breach your business. So what we found when we looked at the studies surrounding employee access is that 86% of employees reuse passwords. So what this means is if 86% of employees are reusing passwords, all it takes is one password to leak on the dark web and someone has access to a ton of information about your company. What's scarier about this, and we deal with this all the time because we do dark web monitoring for a lot of our clients, and when there's a breach, we go in and we change all the passwords that have to do with that breach. What's scary about this, if you don't have a company doing that for you and you just find out that there's a breach and you go to one of your employees and say, hey, there's a breach, change passwords, 45% of employees will refuse. They will not change passwords. They will think, it's not a big deal. Nothing's going to go wrong. When the fact is the exact opposite. So why this is important to you as well, not only as a security prevention, but most of your clients nowadays, from all the agreements that we see with people working in a B2B realm with other businesses, is businesses are starting to require their vendors to have compliance, to protect their data from situations like this. So what's happening more often than not is that these cybersecurity preventions and tools are being put in place because they're now being requirements of your insurance, of your clients as their vendor, or even as consumers, as they get more savvy about protecting their data and their privacy. So there is a whole suite, I don't have time to go into it, of tools that are recommended as a bare minimum to have in place to protect your organizations. Things like advanced antivirus, two-step authentication, patch management, security awareness, passwords, all of those sort of things. One thing I want to do today, though, because you've taken your time out to join us on this webinar, is I do want to offer a free dark web scan. As I mentioned before, one of the biggest points of entry into your company is those passwords that your employees use. Well, we are willing to do a free dark web scan, search the dark web, where people sell these stolen passwords information for anything about your company, and provide that to you so you can start from today protecting your data and protecting your company from these attacks. So with that, I really appreciate it. I'm going to hand it over to Dan, who's going to talk a little bit more about data breach notification in North Carolina.
Hello, my name is Dan Lowell. As I've stated earlier, I'm an attorney here in North Carolina. I'm going to be talking to you today about data breach notification in North Carolina. So the first thing we need to ask is what rules govern data breach in North Carolina. Currently, the law is Identity Theft Protection Act. You can see the statute there on the slides. But there's proposed legislation that's called the Strengthen North Carolina Identity Theft Protection Act. Like many states in the Union, North Carolina is looking to update and revise its privacy controls. What is a data breach? A data breach is unauthorized access to unencrypted personal information that is reasonably likely to cause a material risk of harm. So encryption is the important part. There's an encryption safe harbor here, where if the information is encrypted or redacted and it is accessed through unauthorized means or lost or stolen, then it is covered under the safe harbor and it is not considered a breach. So the only information that's considered a breach is information that is not encrypted or redacted. So what information is protected? Under North Carolina, personally identifiable information is the first name or first initial and last name, along with a laundry list of other components. This could be your social security number, it could be internet access numbers. Some of these terms are not defined, so it isn't clear as to how they apply. But the important thing to note is the current definition of personal information is not as broad in North Carolina as it is in, say, under the GDPR or California's CCPA. So when must a data breach be disclosed? Okay, so anytime a business discovers or is informed that there's been a security breach. Now, the current legislation states that this notice must be given without an unreasonable delay. That's not specified, but it's generally thought to be within a month to 2 months. But you don't really want to, that's not the kind of thing that you want to push and test the waters with the court. Largely, that'll also depend on the scale of the breach. The larger the breach, the shorter that notice is going to be expected to be. The part with law enforcement that's worth noting is that as soon as the law enforcement action is over, then the standard of the without unreasonable delay kicks in again. Who must provide notification? Under the North Carolina Identity Theft Protection Act, Any business that owns or licenses personal information of residents of North Carolina, or any business that conducts business in North Carolina that owns or licenses personal information in any form. So that includes businesses outside of North Carolina that collect data on North Carolina residents, but it also includes North Carolina businesses that collect information on residents of other states, collecting that personal information. It's important to note that under the current North Carolina law, there are no other qualifiers. So if you look at CCPA, there's some amount of data that you have, the number of personal information records that you have, or the amount of income that an individual company has. None of that here applies in North Carolina. It's a very broad definition of what a business is, and you can see that here on the slide. That's straight from the statute. Now, the other thing to note is this does not include government agencies, government subdivisions, or just the government itself. So they're exempt from this law. Okay, so who must be notified in a data breach? There's 3 categories in the event of a data breach of individuals or organizations that need to be notified. First and foremost, the person that's affected. So the data on the individual that was lost, that person is going to need to be notified under this law. Also, if any of that information relates to North Carolina residents, then the state attorney general, their Office of Consumer Protection Division, will need to be notified as well. And then the third component of this, if there's more than 1,000 North Carolina residents, then the applicable credit reporting agencies need to be notified as well. So notifying the affected person, we're just going to go into that category for the purpose of this webinar. But under North Carolina law, it must be a written notice, an electronic notice, so emails would apply, or a telephonic notice. So if you send a recorded phone message, that might be sufficient. It needs to contain all of the information that's listed on this website, and it's very specific in the legislation as to what those details look like. We're not going to go into it here, but as you can see, that's not making a notification to an affected person is not a trivial incident under this law. Okay, and then going forward, North Carolina is not immune to the current discussions about privacy and protection of personal data. Similar to the European GDPR and California's CCPA, North Carolina is looking to update their protection of personal information as well. Back in 2018 and again earlier this year in 2019, there was a recommendation to do the Strengthened North Carolina Identity Theft Protection Act. And as you can see here, again, we're not going to go into the details because they've already changed a few times, but the proposed legislation focuses on 3 broad categories: preventing breaches, increasing consumer protection after a breach, and then providing greater control over personal information. That third component is sort of taking its cue from the GDPR and CCPA and adopting the concept that the information, the person who that personal information applies to should have some kind of control over that information. Again, the other part here is under the increased consumer protection after a breach, there is a limitation to reduce from that without unreasonable delay down to 30 days. Originally, it was proposed to be 15 days, but they've stepped it out to 30 because there was a lot of concern that 15 might be difficult to do. 30 is a much more reasonable, but as those of you who work with GDPR know, there's a 72-hour window for some of those. So, but that's the approach that North Carolina is taking. So to summarize here, North Carolina has some rules in place. They're very specific rules, and they apply to the personal information of North Carolina residents or North Carolina businesses. But it's important to note that North Carolina is adapting its approach to protection of personal data and data breaches, just like the rest of the country is. So anticipate if this act, the Strengthened North Carolina Identity Theft Protection Act, doesn't get put in place, something will soon. And it'll be like the majority of the states in the union in adopting new rules. Thank you very much for your time today.
Well, good morning. This is Fletcher Wilson, Wilson Insurance Services. I'm a commercial insurance broker. I'm the agency principal of Wilson Insurance Services, Inc. We're an independent agent that sells lots of different lines of commercial insurance, but the topic today is cyber liability insurance basics. We'll talk a little bit about our experience in this arena, a little bit about what the policies cover, what the exposures for different types of businesses are. First, a little bit about our agency. I have over 20 years of experience placing cyber liability for commercial clients, over 200 current cyber liability clients with policies in force. And just to give you a little background, if you learn anything from this webinar today, I would like you to learn that in the spring of 2019, pricing for cyber liability policies is as competitive as it's ever been, and significantly more competitive with more carriers in the marketplace than ever before. And we've seen significant decreases really in the last 18 months with lots of new carriers entering the market. And I think the market is maturing significantly. And for that reason, if clients have or your business has priced this type of coverage in the past, one thing I would want to harp on is that if it was too expensive in the past or it wasn't a good value, you may want to reevaluate that because the market, again, has matured further. And the primary reason for that is more statistical data based on claims and new carriers entering the marketplace. And as an example of that, the pricing is all over the board. We've got clients that pay as little as $243 annually for a sole proprietor, all the way up to over $250,000 for a publicly traded company that houses mortgage data. So there is no boilerplate coverage form or pricing model. So in order to do a good cost to benefit analysis, we suggest all of our commercial clients, and for all of our commercial clients, we price this every year, really to cover our bases with their exposures. But you as owning your business, it probably makes sense to price this to make sure you understand what your exposures are and what the cost to insure them is. Again, we're directly appointed with over 65 carriers that write this coverage. We'll talk a little bit about what it covers, some of the myths associated with it. I would also like to mention a couple of the carriers that we represent. We've got preferred status with them. Again, the insurance piece, there are two primary exposures for a business, and most businesses understand the first one better than the second one. So first-party damages would be situations where you're held for ransom or your data is corrupted by a virus or some malevolent software, or they are able to encrypt or erase your data. Anything that damages your data or your systems is a first-party loss. The second part, or second party or third party losses, are associated with anything that you happen to be found liable for sending to an email recipient. So anybody in your office, any employees forward or open malicious code, and it gets sent to a third party and they can track it back to you, you're responsible. And there are lots of legal ramifications of what happens when third parties experience property damage or financial loss as a result of stuff that you send to them. So I think it's important to note that most cyber policies cover both first and third party losses. We'll talk a little bit about what would a data breach cost your company. Since 2013, there have been over 6 million data breaches according to the Breach Level Index, which is the standard global database that tracks cybercrime activity. For small businesses, that being companies under 50 million in annual revenue, the average cost of a data breach is $200,000. And that's surprising to most folks because one of the myths that we talk about to a lot of our small business owners is that folks feel like they can afford to self-insure this exposure without really knowing what the exact cost would be. So there's another statistic here. Can your company survive a data breach event without insurance? In December of 2016, Travelers reported over 60% of small businesses that experience a cyber attack without insurance go out of business as a direct result of the event. So I think it's important to know what your exposure is and what the level of impact that a data breach or any type of cyber liability event could have on your business. Another thing, some folks that we still talk to in this day and age think that their general liability insurance would provide coverage against economic loss. GL policies that we still standard unendorsed GL forms provide no coverage for cyber liability, and it's primarily because the cyber forms are so readily available. GL carriers know that they're going to limit their policy, and exclude all coverage in this area. So the only way to pick up cyber and data breach is to buy a specific policy. So 4 common misconceptions. The size of my business makes it unappealing to attackers. There's lots of data that shows that the low-hanging fruit of small businesses, they have less secure systems. They're actually more likely to be impacted. And you can see on this slide, the companies under 50 million in revenue actually represent 28% of claims. Misconception number 2, I'm safe using the cloud. This is not true. If you read the contracts of most cloud services, they're going to try to push the liability for any associated cyber event back to the purchaser of cloud services. So you might want to check those contracts. Misconception number 3, cyber attack is just like any other computer problem. And I know Robert will talk more about this as well. Cyber exposure is way more than hackers stealing data electronically. It's a significant enterprise type problem, not specifically contained to IT or your computer systems, because you can be held liable for unintentional transmission of virus or malware to a third-party system. So misconception number 4, again, the idea that small businesses can handle claims or can self-insure against those claims if they happen. One of the things, and I think Dan can speak to some of this, is there's no consistency among states as far as what's required for compliance in the event of a data breach. So one of the things that the insurance policy does is gives you a response team that can help you evaluate what is required of you from a legal compliance standpoint. And then, especially for multi-state operations or businesses that have clients out of state, you're going to have differing requirements for each of those states. And that's just one example of sort of the scope of what happens in the event that you have this type of loss that you need to consider beforehand. I'm not going to go in too much depth about what the actual policies cover. They're very tailorable to your specific situation. And again, they're primarily rated off of the type of data that you keep in-house, whether it be PII or PHI, so personally identifiable information. Lots of small businesses have that. PHI, which is health-related information, that's more specific to healthcare entities. But so that the idea, if you can take one thing away from this part of the presentation, is that your pricing for cyber liability is very closely tied to what your actual exposure is, the type of data that you house, and then it also is related to the systems and procedures and some of the things that your IT provider can do to mitigate that loss. Again, insurance provides you not only with the defense cost associated with defending a claim, as well as the compliance and the legal response side, but it also provides you with some guidelines about how to avoid this type of claim, some of the best practices, procedures, what type of firewall based on your type of business you should have. So there are lots of advantages to having a team, a claims response team, to having someone underwrite your business for cyber liability so that you understand your exposures and can mitigate them. So again, it's very difficult to come up with a cost-benefit analysis on your specific entity unless you get a price from a broker that has access to a good portion of the market. Again, for the larger companies, Beasley Breach Response is a primary player. For smaller businesses, we use Philadelphia Insurance Company as well as Travelers. They both have really great forms. Most of our carriers, we represent over 165 carriers. Most of them have some type of cyber add-on but we've found significant weakness in some of those forms. The best forms are standalone cyber policies that cover a broad range and are very tailorable to your specific business. Again, one takeaway from our side of the equation is we feel very strongly that all of our commercial clients have an exposure, some significantly more exposure than others, but it's very important for us as agents to offer this coverage, explain it, have our clients understand that they need to evaluate their own exposure and with our help. The pricing again is much more competitive now. Let me give you a final example in closing. A client we had that was paying $7,000 a year in 2017. It went down to about $4,500 in 2018. And this renewal, which we just did on 5/1, the pricing came down to $1,700. And they're housing not PHI, but a lot of personally identifiable information. Not a huge company, but it just gives you an example. This coverage may be more affordable than you think. We're offering to every single one of our clients, even sole proprietors. Our motto is if you have a phone and you're in business, regardless of whether you have a website or do e-commerce, you have an exposure for cyber liability. And so for that reason, we offer it as agents to all of our commercial clients and feel strongly that everybody should evaluate it and consider transferring the risk via an insurance mechanism. There are lots of advantages to doing it that way, but to at least understand what it costs and do a cost-benefit analysis. So appreciate your time this morning. If you have any questions, you can reach us through the Triad Cyber Roundtable group. Thank you.
Well, thank you all very much for joining us today. We hope you all enjoyed the event today. And we do want to leave you with a parting gift of our Cybersecurity Getting Started checklist, which you can download at triadcyberroundtable.org/checklist or use the QR code here in the webinar. Thank you so much. And if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to us at the same website that our checklist is at triadcyberroundtable.org. Thanks so much. Have a good one.